We're live.
Yes, we are live. Hey, everybody out there. This is Beyond Solitaire. I'm Liz. I'm here with Fred from Homo Ludens. And this is a show with our special guest, Dr. Henry Lowood, about play by mail. We're resurrecting wargame archaeology.
Nice. Thanks
So,
for having me again. Wait, but you're contractually obliged to have me on the show, so but I will still thank you for that. And yeah,
yes.
super happy to meet you, Henry.
Yeah, same here. I'm even more thankful since I'm not contractually obliged to be here. So it's really nice to have been invited.
Yes, Fred and I signed a pact with the devil and signed it in
Yeah.
blood. So now
Oh,
we are. No,
Now we have to do like we have contractually we're supposed to make 12 streams together a year, um,
oh.
and potentially more. But I think it's fine. We're a bit late this year though, so yeah.
yeah, we
We have
gotta
to.
pick it up.
Yeah.
But Henry, for people who don't know who you are and what you do, can you give like the brief overview of your work?
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, I have a very long title. I'll give that first. I'm the Harold C. Hobach Curator at Stanford University. I'm responsible for the History of Science and Technology collections and the Film and Media collections. I also run a thing called the Silicon Valley Archives at Stanford. And we collect games. We've collected electronic digital games since the late 1990s. And in the last year or so, we've ramped up our effort to collect board games as well. Kind of in the reverse order. We did digital games first and then physical games second.
Yes, that's wild. Oh, and as we were talking about before the stream, so
Yeah.
Henry has actually also sweet talked me into donating the Beyond Solitaire podcast to this archive. So I'm in the middle of transferring like files and videos over to be stored so that I can annoy all of you even if I died tomorrow. So
Which we hope won't happen. I want to say it.
Yes,
Yes.
please no.
yeah, of course not.
Yeah,
but
I hope
my ability to annoy people will outlast my lifetime.
I hope at some point I can make a pitch to Fred, maybe the show, to do the same with Homo Ludens.
Yeah, I would be happy to share anything that you want. I think archiving those kind of things is great, and I think it resonates really well with the series. We are able to do that series Wargame Archaeology because a lot of stuff that we're looking into has been archived. So, yeah, I think that's. I would be more than happy to collaborate in that effort.
Great.
Yeah, and Henry, have you watched any of our previous episodes of Wargame Archaeology?
I've watched episodes of both of your individual podcasts, but not of Wargame Archaeology. No.
Shameful,
Is it
Henry.
new or
Shameful.
yeah, it is
How
shameful.
how dare you? How dare you come on the show and
I will
just
do penance afterwards. But in fairness, I have watched many of your watched or listened to many of your individual shows before, so I'm not entirely a sinner. I'm in limbo, let's say.
okay, that's fine.
Very well. But Wargame Archaeology is a project that Fred and I do together, where we've been reading issues of the General. We've actually been talking about playing Africa Core by mail, so this is very relevant for us. And we've basically been we streamed D-Day. We're basically looking at like the early history of our hobby and talking about it from our perspective as people who are new comparatively to the 60s. So
Interesting. What possessed you to start to go back to the '60s? Just interest to start with the beginnings of the hobby.
I think that was the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
So it started from just finding out that all of the issues of the General had been archived in PDF, and Liz and I were talking about this, and we had people in our community that were really into also sharing old articles from older magazines, and this whole idea that when you look back you realize that a lot of discussions that we're having today were already happening at the time. And
Mhm.
I think through discussions, Liz and I thought it would be really interesting to look back from the beginning and try to maybe chronologically try to go through everything that we could find, the games, the magazines, but also the people. We had a long form interview with Marco Giro, who started wargaming really early on, and just also having the experiences from the people that went through that whole era, just trying to get a sense and figure out where the hobby came from, to better understand where it is now. So that was the whole idea. And I would say for now we were really having a lot of fun. I'm just struggling to find a copy of Africa Core in France, but that's the way it
In
is. But we've
France,
managed to do
yeah.
it. Yeah. If it was in the US, I wouldn't have any issues. There is a lot of copies available in the US for very cheap. In Europe, it's a bit more tricky. But yeah, I guess we'll figure it out. We did play D-Day, that was fun, and we're planning on playing other games. But yeah, I hope that we're going to be able to play more. But it's really the idea of consuming everything that we can and trying to do it chronologically. And we came up to this discussion about, wait a minute, how did people play in, like, not sitting at the same table in the past, not having internet? How do you handle RNG and everything? And Liz came up with, like, she actually knew you, and she was like, oh, we need to have him on the stream. That's going to be awesome. And yeah, I'm really excited. I know nothing. And that's what I said to Liz before the stream. It's like, haven't prepared anything. I don't know. I'm just curious, and I'm just going to ask a ton of questions. But I'm just here for pure fun, I would say, and curiosity.
Yeah, we're good at questions.
I'll just say real quick, my first 2 games, since you're in that era, besides sports games, I played a lot of sports games when I was a kid. And they were fairly sophisticated. Things like Stratomatic games, statistics-based games and so forth. The first 2 war-related games that I played were in high school. I had an AP. The only AP class I took was an AP History or Social Studies class. I don't remember. Some TA or instructor from UCLA came to my high school, and we played diplomacy. That was about half the class was diplomacy. That was the first thing. And the first game that I owned, that I bought myself, was Panzerblitz, which in my household was called Panzerblitz. And the reason for that was I grew up in a German American, my parents spoke German. So we had a historical background, and I thought, somehow I found out about this game. Got it. I was probably late high school to early college, more likely late high school. Got it at home. Had nobody in the neighborhood remotely interested. I could get anybody to come over and play a baseball game, a football game, a basketball game, no problem. Board game. Zero interest. So I decided, okay, I'm going to study this thing and figure it out. And I failed. I could not figure it, which gives you an idea of, it's really important for me in a lot of things that I do to realize that there's such a big difference between the historical actors playing a game in the 1960s and somebody in 2024 going back to play a game like that. Because when you go back and play, let's say you had never played, you do as part of your project, you played Africa Core. You never played Africa Core. It probably took you 15 minutes to figure it out. It's a relatively simple game. And not a big problem. In early 70s, late whenever it was, that Panzerblitz was a really complicated game compared to everything else that I'd been exposed to, and I simply could not figure out how to play it. Today, go back to it, it's really easy. And I complain about all the simplifications in it that really don't make it much of a simulation, right? But that was, me 40 some odd years later compared to when I first played it.
Oh, that's really interesting. And yeah, so one of the reasons that we wanted you on the show is because not only does your archive contain some play-by-mail archives, but some of them are yours. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing behind me is not mine, but I pulled up a few things that I brought with that. Unless it's going to work with the backgrounds. No, it doesn't work that well. You can kind of see.
Hold it up close.
Hold it up close to the.
Oh yeah, if you have the background.
Should I get? Yeah. Let me get rid of the background.
Turn off. We can see your professor office. It's good. It can't be as bad as my office, right?
Let's see. I'm not too used. Okay, virtual background, none.
Woo!
Yeah. So this is a later version, something that Avalon Hill published. I'm going to say this was in the 80s when this was all mature and people had figured it out. The case for playing by mail. Okay, you want to learn how to play by mail. This is another thing, 1980s versus 2024. You can see this is triple column, single space, right? It's 8 pages. It's
pretty
8
dense.
pages going
Yeah.
over how to, and there's a code of conduct. Area, by the way, the rules for area, that was the system for keeping track of player scores based on their wins and losses and all of that sort of thing. So a lot went into developing these systems. It was, even though it might seem relatively simple looking back on it, it was really quite complicated. And people would say, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to read this 8-page single, I don't know how many words it is, but very complicated document. And I have lots of stuff like that.
So there were different periods. So that means that in the beginning, people were playing by mail in a more informal way, trying to figure out as they went. And then starting in the 80s, like you had companies coming up with actual solutions to play by mail. So that
actually earlier. Do you want me to give a quick rundown of the history?
Yeah, actually, it would be curious just to have
4 minutes, maybe.
this context.
Okay. The early play-by-mail systems were developed in the mid-'60s. I am focused, the work that I've written about it a little bit, and my interests are more focused on war games that are dice-based. The Avalon Hill games in particular, the kinds of games exactly the games that you're playing. I want to just mention that at the same time, almost exactly the same time, though the people in this other community claim priority, systems were developed for diplomacy. The first PBM system, as far as I know, for diplomacy was developed in '63, and the systems that I'm talking about are '64. So they're very close. For all intents and purposes, this was going on at the same time. You can argue about a few months here or there. So there was the diplomacy side of things, and then there was the, let's call it the Avalon Hill board game side of things. What's the main difference between those two systems? Dice. Diplomacy's PBM system was through I forget what they called it, some kind of moderator, someone that
an umpire
governed. Wait, let me check. Did I write down somewhere? A game master. They called it a game master, I guess.
Game master. Okay.
And they had some zines. There was one I remember called Graustock. I don't know why it's called that, but that was formed around the '63, '64 time period. And basically the moves would be sent into this game master, who would then adjudicate things and tell everybody what happened. And it was more like almost like a diary kind of system going back and forth, but you didn't have that problem with rolling dice. Board games you're playing from that era, based on the hexagonal grid map, placement of units, and dice, had a couple of problems. One was in the original games. I mean, you can look at your Africa core map. Pretty sure there's no indication of what the hexes are identified as. There's no system.
I never thought about
numbering
this.
of hexes, right?
Yeah.
So first thing you have to do is figure out how you're going to tell somebody where a unit is. So you have to that's part one, and part two is, of course, you have a combat results table to resolve combat. You have to roll a die to do that. How are you going to do that? And the corollary to how are you going to roll the dice is, do I trust that other person? Because you could have a system. Avalon Hill talked about this when they were introducing their own system. They said, there is such a thing as, we call it the honor system. You could just let the other person roll dice, and the community, a little bits and pieces of opinions about the system I've heard is basically players say, you can't trust wargamers to do that. No way. So they had to come up with something else to deal with those two problems. The first thing they dealt with by suggesting kind of a row and column system. You could A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, something like that, where you could identify them. Okay. And you could you figure out a way. Usually the units did have some sort of unit identification on them. So you could say unit X is at B3 or whatever it is. And then Avalon Hill around '64 introduced printed sheets, a form that would enable you, they call it, I forget what they call it now, something like the order of battle form or something like that, where you could indicate where each unit was placed according to this grid. Great. And then you could list the combats. these are my units, my opponent's units, odds are 3 to 1, and then there's a space there for combat result. But how do you do that? Avalon Hill introduced that in a kit they distributed, I think in '64, that covered Africa Corps and D-Day and some of the other games that were around at that time. And with it, they said, we're going to have a contest to deal with rolling dice. We do, however, there's some conditions to this contest, and one of which they introduced another concept that's really important here. They said it's going to be based on what I'm trying to remember what it's called, on the CTD, which is something transaction date, I believe. It's what that is when you looked in the newspaper every day and you saw the stock transactions, they would tell you how many shares had traded in various stocks. So IBM was around then. So you look up the IBM and it would say 400,000 shares traded. Okay. Avalon Hill originally suggested, as this contest was announced, I never really saw that they actually changed the system based on what people submitted for this contest. They just said, hey, send us your ideas about this. So 400,000 shares ends in 0, right? So you have a 1 to 10 system, basically, with 0 being 10. Guess what they did first? They came up with a different combat results table that they distributed. So instead of 6 options, you had 10 options. If you take an example where there's 6 options, 1 to 2 is one result, 2 to 3 is 3 to 4 is another result, 5 to 6 is another result. Each has a 1/3 probability. Theirs was 1 to 4 is the first result, 5 to 7 is the second result, 8 to 10 is the third result. So it's 40, 30, 30. And as it turned out, usually that first number was advantageous to the attacker. So people responded basically saying, whoa, the game's a little different now. The game has shifted to the attacker. This won't work. And things were in flux for a short period of time. Eventually, Avalon Hill, I don't know if this was based on input they got. I haven't nailed that down. But Avalon Hill then announced, and this was in their kits, that what you're going to do is you're going to divide that number, 400,000 in this case, by 6. Now you're going to get a result from 1 to 6, right? From the remainder, actually 0 to 5, but you can figure it out. So you're going to get that result. You divide that remainder becomes your shifted becomes your die roll. You apply that. And you apply that to the system. So you would send these sheets out. I mean, I don't know if here's, let's see, I've got one here that's blank. No, maybe not. You would
I wonder if I'm looking in your slides, see if there's one in here, Henry. Is it
Well,
this thing?
Let's see. Let me see. Let me enlarge that. This is the AHIC system. I'll get to that in a second. Of course, it gets more complicated. It's this kind of a sheet. You can see that there's, looking at it backwards here. So you have your battles listed, and then you have, everything on there, and you write that on there, and then you would write the stock is on here. You tell what the stock is and the date and the remainder, and then you would do your combat results based on that. But show the second thing that I'll skip fast forward, and then I can end the history real quick.
Oh, yeah. Here, put it back up.
So that was popular, but then a few years later, I think 66, that will be good. Something was founded called AHIKS, AHIKS, the Avalon Hill Intercontinental Kriegspiel Society. They developed their own. I'm not 100% sure of this. About 95% sure of it. AHIKS is still around today. They have a newsletter, Commandeur. They have, I believe the system still is used. Somebody could correct me if I'm wrong about that. What you would do in this case is you would contact them. they would generate these tables that you see the bottom half of that sheet there. That's pre-generated. It goes to both players. They don't see the sheet that the other person has. The matchmaker, AHIX had a person in the role of matchmaker, basically. Would, you'd write to them and say, I'd like to play Africa Corps with somebody. In this case, it's Russian campaign, which I played an awful lot this way. Say, I want a game of TRC, the Russian campaign. Is there somebody, they match you with somebody else who wants to play it. We each get a sheet. You'd start writing to each other. There's your letter. And and you start playing. When you do the same idea, you list your combats, locations. Now, as you can see, of course, there's numbers on the map. The hexes are the hexagons on the maps are identified, so it's much easier to list your units. Then you would refer to some place on the grid. Tell the player use that cell, the value in that cell for the die roll. They would then cross that one out. You can't use it again. And they would see, like you can see, there's 1s, 2s, 3s, the die roll numbers. You would use that and resolve the combat using that. So those were the two of most commonly used systems. The Avalon Hill system using just the stock roll tables. The transaction table is divided by 6, or these sheets that AHIX provided. And AHIX also had its own ranking system, newsletter, all of these things. I'll make one last point and then I will be quiet.
No, don't be quiet.
Yeah, don't be quiet.
Well, I'll be quiet for
all
a while.
of it.
Yeah, well, I want to hear what other people have to say. The other thing is, this is really interesting from the point of view of the technology and the mechanics and the process and all of that. Where it's really, really interesting historically is how this figured in developing the community, this sort of niche culture for war games during this period of the 1960s. We all know that this was a key period for the development of these games. At Avalon Hill, followed very closely by SPI and James Dunnigan, that this was all going on. But like the example I gave of myself before, many of the people who were interested in playing these games and investing the time to figure out how to play these loony games, that were very different from other things they were playing, they more than likely did not have anybody next door or friends from school or whatever the case might be nearby that they could play with. So the General, the magazine that I think you mentioned earlier from Avalon Hill, began to work towards developing a community for these games. And at the back of the magazine, they also told people, they had these kind of little ads that you placed if you wanted to play. One way to do that was I'd say, here I am, I'm in Los Angeles, their player, nearby in Los Angeles. And then you would meet up with people.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of those in Avalon Hills in general, and we talked about it. Like, it was a big part of the magazine, like all of those ads. Yeah,
and so this took that to another level. It made it possible for the people who were not nearby to still play a game via postal mail. And I would guess at a certain period in time, probably pretty early, these kinds of games were, or this method of getting players together through postal mail probably was more common than people actually answering ads and meeting each other. That's my guess. It's very difficult to document a claim like that, just my sense from the time, and so some of the documentation I've seen. But this is all part of that process of constructing. There's a guy named Rex Martin who used to work for Avalon Hill, who wrote a dissertation about the history in this period, particularly at Avalon Hill. He called it a subculture. I think the word community is more like what we would say today about this, maybe a niche culture of some sort. I don't think it really works to call it a subculture quite as well, but definitely community. How do you do that when people are scattered around and you don't have the internet, you don't have email, you don't have all of these things? This is how they did it.
That is so interesting. I guess one of my questions, so like, maybe this is just me not knowing how to live in a society before technology now, but if I wanted a form, then, I can just get it in my email and print it out at home. If I want to send a form I've written on, I can use Knowability, or I can just scan it in my phone or take a picture and just send it to somebody else's email. Like, how did people? I mean, was it easy to go photocopy these forms? Like, how did you even learn that these things existed? How did you replicate them enough to actually play?
Well, Evelyn Hill sold kits, so you
Ah,
could buy forms, and they would like like the legal sheets of paper. You tear them off when they were bound together, glued together. Maybe at one end you get 50 or 25 in a pack or something like that. You could do it that way, or of course maybe you could. If you had a photocopy machine at work, not saying I ever did anything like that, but if you had one, maybe you could do that as well. I can't recall this ever happening, but I'm going to put a guarantee down that some people made their own forms, just drew them and put them in. But Avalon Hill, it's in '64, they released a kit. They didn't. It was kind of strange because, as far as I can tell, they didn't announce this kit until this thing I mentioned about this sort of contest and how this thing works. That was I think May '64 was the first issue of the General. So it's right around the same time. I don't know when the General first announced the Play by Mail. I mean, I do know in my notes somewhere, but I don't know off the top of my head. But the kit was already in boxes, or it was already available to buy before they actually announced it. So they were sort of on top of it to provide this to people, to encourage it. And I'm sure the explanation for that is since it came out almost exactly when the General started, that this was part of a Tom Shaw, who was running the company at that time, was very good at this kind of thing. He had taken over from Roberts not that long before that. And he had a plan for developing this community, that these things were part of it. So that was how most people did it, is they got these packets from Avalon Hill, or in the case of AHIX, like that thing you see there, they mailed that to me. I didn't print it out on my own computer. When I was playing, a lot of PVM was later, after college. I kind of, like many people, I didn't have time to play during my college years, and in fact, I went to grad school, so you can imagine it was quite a break. But then as I was coming back into it, by that time, I had a personal computer at home and that sort of thing. And there was already, in my archive, I can see this. I have printouts of email alongside the paper. That move still had to go by paper because of this crazy system designed to trust your opponent. But you were still corresponding. You would say, like, wait a second, if you notice that one unit had been moved illegally, let's say one hex too far than they could because of terrain or something like that, at that time you might shoot an email to the other person, say, where do you want me to put the unit? And then you'd have the email to document that. You could just move forward. Do you want me to change the combat? You could do things like that. So it's kind of getting to be hybrid. Third phase of this is, of course, games that are developed for the express purpose of playing by mail or on electronic systems like Prodigy. Like Jim Dunnigan designed some games like that in the '80s. And then finally, I guess,
what is Prodigy?
Prodigy was early internet, not ARPANET based, not the whole university military complex based network, but it was a thing developed by Sears and which is a big department store company at the time in the U.S., and some other companies for home. Kind of like
it was my family's first home internet on our computer.
Yeah.
I actually was like a later adopter into household. My parents got the internet. My little brother got really into it, and then I learned how to use it to instant message my friends and like read fan fiction.
Yeah. Fred, do you know about Minitel? You have Minitel,
yeah,
right?
That's what Alexander
like
is saying.
The same idea.
It's actually the mini, because when you said Sears and it was like a network that is not like ARPANET or not distributed, then I would say it looks like the Minitel. Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Yeah, CompuServe's another example of that kind of thing. There were games on there. The more recent thing, and I'm just now starting a project on the history of this, is Vassal and those systems where you're using the board game, but the system itself encompasses all of the mechanics and everything like that. You kind of leave the board game behind, even though it's based on the board game. That was developed in the 90s. So, and now it's, yeah, without a doubt, that's the way most people play board games remotely, is through something like Vassal or Tabletop Simulator, or, other things like that.
I'm curious then, how long would the game, like let's say the Russian campaign, purely via mail, no email, anything, just using the system and everything, how long would it take? Like,
could last over a year.
Yeah.
Could last if you were really fast. Think about the different phases some games had and things like that. You're not getting a move done in less than a couple of weeks, right? If you're playing a big, long game, a campaign game, it could be a year. A lot of them fizzled. People just gave up at some point. But I had a ranking. I had games that were completed. One person won, and the other person won. So games were completed, but you'd have to figure with a big game you were going to play at least a year.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that's super long. Where do you put the game in that?
Let me upload another background here, and I will show you. Do you see that behind me?
So okay, that's a system that I see in clubs and stuff like this. Okay,
yeah. And then what happened was that the Commandeur, the magazine that AHIX published, had an article where somebody said, "Oh, was that us? Oh, I had sent you that already."
No, I just want everybody to see it. Yeah.
They had an article where they basically said, if you're playing a lot of games, here's how you can build this. So I built it. I can't remember now. It's 6 or 8 games. You would have a big plywood board that you put the map on, and you would slip it into that, take it in or out depending on which game you were playing. You put it on another table, do your move, send it off in the mail, put it back on that shelf, and then maybe move on to another game that you got to move from.
And do you have the impression that some designers or some companies started change their design to make it more play-by-mail friendly, or it didn't really have any impact? Because as you said, some games have like a lot of back and forth between, especially in the modern days, whereas in the past you had a lot of very static I go, you go, which also makes a lot more sense when you're playing over mail. Do you feel like it had actually an impact on the design itself?
I can't point to a specific example of that, but historically you're pointing to what became a big problem for playing by postal mail. The more chopped up the turn was, the more interactive the turn was, the more it went away from I go, you go, the more difficult the system became in terms of just time that it took. Conversely, if I had been a game designer, maybe the thing I would have played with on this, again, I can't think of an example of anybody doing it, but it would be that the pace of the game, the way you approach the game was quite different. Think about it, like if you're playing face-to-face, if you're playing Africa Core, for example, you have a minute or two to think about what you're going to do, and then the rest of you figure out exactly how it's going to be worked out. Postal game, you're going to you might spend hours thinking about the turn. Seriously, that was what it was. So the games, if you did them as sort of like an after-action report of the game, it would have been very good play, very well thought out play and detail. You had a different pace and rhythm to the game, and the amount of thought you could give to each turn. That would have been something that I imagine a game developer a game designer might have thought about, but I can't think of an example of anyone doing that.
The other thing I wondered about when you were talking about it is, if you are still learning the rules to a game, it must be so hard to learn it in isolation and with play-by-mail, especially with a partner to whom you keep submitting wrong moves and you have to work it out by mail. Like, how many games just kind of died on the vine because of that? And then, how many games did people who are playing by mail often keep going at one time?
I was pretty hardcore for a while. I would say I did have that table full with maybe a half dozen or so games at a time that were going. And yes, games did fail. There was Another thing about play by mail is you have the turn, the here's where my units move, here's the combats, let's resolve the combats, back and forth. But we're corresponding by mail, right? That means I can stick a letter in. You know, you have some examples of that in the images. Yeah, I can stick a letter. I can talk about. Sometimes that would be, you know, I haven't been feeling well. I'm sorry, this was a slow move. Just had ankle surgery or something. I've been laid up. Those kinds of things. But also, you'd get trash talk. You would get. I remember one very distinctly. It was in this archive that we acquired at Stanford. I refer to it loosely as an archive. It was a whole bunch of letters from the 60s from an MIT club around play-by-mail. And there's one letter in there where the guy says, everybody makes mistakes and you are no exception. Here are the mistakes in your move. so you would get stuff like that. You know, that sorry, this move doesn't work, and it could get frosty, you know, a little bit if somebody was repeatedly making or even with all the time that you have to study, you would still disagree about the rules sometimes. Avalon Hill had some people that they usually players who were considered experts on games that could sometimes adjudicate those things. I don't remember exactly how that worked, but AHIX also had people who, I do remember they had specific people who decided when there was a disagreement in a game, you would say, here's how I interpret this rule. The other opponent would say, here's how I interpret this rule. And, you know, it's different. We're impasse here. What do we do? And they would, you know, have to decide for you. All of this is in there. This is all the stuff that happens in real time at a convention, say, if there's a tournament. But it's happening, still has to happen, but it's just drawn out. It's much slower. It's much more, but I don't want to say it's less intense, because it's still, actually, if you spend hours thinking about a move, it gets pretty intense. You lose sleep over it, you know, that kind of thing. But it's still a much more drawn out process, but basically everything that happens when you play games still is going to happen.
Interesting. Yeah, I think about these relationships forming too, because so I have people that I play Obsession with that I've never met in real life, but because we do a move, then maybe like make a comment about somebody's fancy event or trashy guest or whatever. You know, I feel like these people are my friends. You know, like, and you know, Fred, I can talk shit to your face, like, but we've become friends exclusively because the internet exists.
Yeah.
And so in the letters, like, do you see indicators that people are becoming friends as opposed to just game opponents? Like, did you make friends this way or just kind of friendly banter?
Absolutely. And it's different levels. You know, there are people you're casual with, you know, and you say might say a few things to. There's some people you played multiple games with. You have the same interest. You talk about things more extensively with them. And there are people you say, hey, I'm going to a wedding this weekend. My turn's going to be a little delayed. We're going to, do you know any good restaurant? Do you happen to know what's in Providence? You know any good restaurants there? You know, you would talk about those things, and you would talk about it more. It is different because again, we're talking about postal mail here. So I don't see the face. I have no idea usually how old the person is or anything like that. So everything that's revealed is revealed there on the paper. It's not like even you know it's not there are no other clues that you get really other than maybe where somebody lives. So it's all basically all of the above. Different kinds of relationships would form. I also played by mail with people I had played with in person, or you would play by mail and then meet at a convention. You know, you might meet at Origins or something like that. So there's those options for developing relationships. Then let me make one other sort of historical point again to this thing. Like I would title an article, "It is what it is, not what it was," meaning you can't go back again. And the thing is, when I talk about those things of having a remote friend, you know, that you're getting to know in a certain way, we did not yet have the experiences that we have with the internet, virtual worlds, raiding in a World of Warcraft together, and all of those sorts of things that we now are used to, and we're used to and pretty comfortable with the idea of virtual friends, virtual acquaintances, people forming relationships that way, all of that. This wasn't those ways of familiarizing yourself with this kind of relationship were not there yet. It was postal mail, and that was it. So it probably wasn't the relationships probably weren't as deep or easy to create as we would think today.
So you never made friends with people that you played by mail, or?
Yeah, at the time, I would say no. I would say probably no lasting friendships beyond that time. I did, however, make lasting friendships with people that I met through ads in the back of the General, people I'm still in contact with, including probably a couple of names. I'm not going to say them, but a couple of names you probably recognize because they're well-known game designers now.
We want to know now. You cannot just drop this.
Name drop.
Offline. But so that part of it, yes. But then, of course, you were meeting face to face, and in San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I lived then, I've been here most all my adult life, really. There was a pretty active community in the Bay Area, and so you might have to drive from San Mateo County, where I am, to the East Bay, that kind of thing. You might drive 30 or 40 miles to meet somebody, but you would do that, and you'd get to know them. And yeah, they're definitely people I've stayed in touch with. And of course, the third leg of the stool is the whole convention scene, which is like another way of meeting people and playing games that you could in a way that you couldn't do at home.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So in terms of I guess collections, so this is something you're talking about your personal experiences, but you've also collected these items, these artifacts of play by mail for archival storage and also for scholarly work. What kinds of collections have you acquired, and how do you get them?
Well, every collection is different, and how they happen. I happen to know about them. Some are quite random. Others are me reaching out to people. Others are, me meeting people like you, Liz, and saying, by the way, we have a home for your podcast series if you'd like, and we'll archive it. With regard to play by mail, I will say documentation is pretty scarce. These are like many other things. This is considered pretty ephemeral by people who play the games. I would guess maybe this episode will help. I would guess most people who played these games probably still do have records of some or all of the games that they played. I never threw anything out for in terms of play by mail sheets, those kinds of things. So I have a personal archive. But they haven't thought that they would be of interest to anybody else. They haven't, done that sort of thing. It's kind of unlike like a different medium as maybe the after action reports to sort of diaries of games that people have written up. Those are shared and circulate.
Y'all keep going. I'm having a cat moment.
Oh, okay. I thought, yeah.
This is Kato. He's digging his claws in my leg. I'll be right back. So I think with the documents we're talking about here and some of the things we've shown, so they're rare. They're hard for me to get to, and I would be interested in what people might have. So that doesn't mean they're impossible to find. I'll give an example of one which I consider maybe the best thing that I've found so far in this vein. And this was eBay. Somebody was selling a copy of Stalingrad. It was in the box version. It was in the box. It was it was an unusual. It was one of the later versions of the game that was unusual. I'm a collector, but I'm not a collector of, in terms of this is the box with the red stripe on the side. Very rare.
that means nothing to me. But this was sort of in that category, a version of the solid ground game. But by the way, the really nice thing about this is there's a whole bunch of these letters stuffed in the box. That got my interest. So I bid on it, got it up for the library, and it's in our Department of Special Collections now, in our Rare Books and Manuscripts department. So this is kind of manuscript collection. What's in there? It's from the mid-'60s, from something that was originally called the MIT Wargame Society, I think. It's now called, or then became the MIT Simulation Society. It still exists in a different form. It's a lab, kind of a lab at MIT. It's mostly focused on Euro games and things like that. And the letters were in there. The founding of the club. The guy sold it. Even pointed out in the eBay listing that one of the letters gave the date at which this was the first document this person had seen, giving the actual date when the society was founded at MIT, stuff like that. And there were records of several play-by-mail games that were played at that time. Now, this mid-'60s. Remember, I told you before, the system starts in the mid-'60s. So this is like at the very beginning of this kind of play. And, another thing I said earlier is you and I, we can go back and play the games now, but whatever we do is going to be very influenced by everything else we've encountered with games. Different standards of production quality for board games, different mechanisms, all sorts of things. This is the people who are. These documents are are voiced by the people who actually were playing the games at that time. They don't know about any of this stuff that came later. So It's really, when you read what they're saying, how they're interacting with each other, it's a document of that period telling us how people received these games at this very, very early period. That's like archival gold for me. I mean, it's just such a fantastic source to be able to get something like that.
Do you have like example of things that you discovered going through those mails, of how they received those games that we might not expect? Like, do you have any like things to illustrate how different it was?
Yeah. Well, there was. This goes back to something Liz said. There were quite a bit of incorrect moves. There was quite a bit of evidence that this really was sort of a new thing they were doing, and they weren't quite sure all the time how it worked. The other thing that surprised me. So this is the MIT Simulation Society, right? It's like highbrow gaming, right? That's the way you start thinking about it. Boy, there was a lot of trash talking in there. There was, so it wasn't, it was, that was a little surprising. Oh, another thing I should mention is there were several people in there in the military, which is not surprising, but it's a document that when we could say like a lot of people who were involved in this growing, young community at that time were in the military. You can also see that when you look at the general and they talk about, their various correspondence and things like that. That's the kind of stuff that I see in there. I guess that the really, and now that you've asked the question, if I would go back to it, I probably would be more analytical about like what kinds of mistakes they were making, what were the real stumbling blocks with the use of the system, that kind of thing.
Oh, now I'm interested in that question too. Dang it, Henry.
We haven't scanned that, but it's available. Anybody who wants to can use it, and you can request reproductions, photocopies, basically, of things. So it's available for research. That's another thing I should point out. I'm at Stanford. Everybody thinks private university, I can't use it. That's too bad. No, it's open to the public. Our special collections department is one of the departments that anybody in the world can use. You do have to show up physically, but you can also contact them by email and request things, and they'll do the best they can. There's limits to how much they can sit down and scan for you, but and it's really, you do want to go. If you're ever in the Bay Area, that would be something. I'm the person you would contact just write to me a few weeks before you're showing up, and I'm talking both to the two of you and also to whoever's listening. I'll walk you through the drill about how you request things and where to go and all of that.
Oh man, now I need to schedule a trip. So just before we kind of run too low on time, I want to go through the images that you compiled, just because I know that you put them together for a reason, right? So I want to check them out. This is a cool little cover. I take it this is you.
That's my depiction of me with the help of my good friend Copilot. So my mother's side, I'm Austrian, so that's the flag. I don't know what the thing is in my mouth. I guess it is there, and yet I'm not quite that gray yet. But that's what Copilot came up with.
All right.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. We have a program. I mentioned earlier that we started about a year ago to get really serious about tabletop games. We have a long-standing program around digital games, video games, and such, virtual worlds. My personal take is that the really compelling innovation in game design in the last few years has been much more on the board game side than on the video game side. That's something for maybe people to discuss, but that's my opinion. And so I thought we really need to start paying attention to this. And we've now, I won't go into the details, but we've now started collecting contemporary games and all of that. It's not that easy to set this all up, but we've managed to do that. And with that, we have an events program called Tabletop Tuesdays. This has been going now, we're just starting our third year, actually. We started this a little before the collecting program. Typically, we'll find a game that we can play in an hour or so, or at least get through a turn, perhaps, and pair that with a related short lecture or somebody talking about the theme that the game is about, something that's related to the game, something like that. So it's a pairing of something that's sort of a preface to the game, and then digging into a game that the two curators of this event series have started. It's not me in this case. I was really happy that I have two colleagues in the library who are organizing Tabletop Tuesdays. I'll say to people like yourselves and others in game design, if you're ever planning a trip to the Bay Area and well in advance, such that we could slot you in for one of these, please.
It's too far away.
But you never know. It could be 2 years from now, that you have some occasion for being here. We can also do things, by the way, now that you've said that, the room that this happens in has very good connectivity and video conferencing in it. So we could actually have somebody participate remotely. It wouldn't be as much fun as being in the space and talking to people, but it's an option.
Maybe I'll extend SD HisCon, like my trip next year.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Oh, there you go.
Now I'm thinking about it. Also, Brant, who runs the Wargame stuff at Origins, occasionally comes to the Bay Area as well. So you might get us piling in now.
Let me know. And like in your case, we would probably I said, we always have something as a preface. In your case, we probably want to say something on your podcast series as well. As whatever game. I mean, you'll have a game to show. We're looking into doing some launch events. Where I hope it's okay that I say this. I don't think we've announced this yet, but in the winter we want to do one for Molly House.
Cool.
With Cole, and he'll be coming to Stanford, and we'll do something like that. So that's another option. Is if it's kind of like book talks, right? Except it's with board games.
I like it.
It's an awesome initiative, and I can see on this screenshot that you're featuring Tim Hutchings games, which are fascinating games. You're talking about Cold World, so it looks like there is really an effort to go and engage with, I would say seriously with the community, like looking at a very, very interesting designers that are really forward thinking. So it's really cool.
Yeah, so I'm a board gamer, but my Silicon Valley Archives, which is not a game project, it's about the history of Silicon Valley, right? But I have a team of 4 people, and we have the board gamer, me, the war gamer. We have a CCG player, and we have a RPG player. So we have
So you have all
everything
of
pretty.
the
Yeah, we can, and everyone is quite in their domains is pretty well plugged in. So we sort of know, and that's the basis really for my claim that the interesting innovation is happening in board games at various kinds, various formats, card games included.
And going back to play by email, Henry, you made me think about something. Did you notice some similarities in other categories of games when it comes to play by email? Did you notice like play by mail RPGs, play by mail other stuff, and any connections between communities around this? Or
Well, of course, it's later because like the big impact of role playing games, leading up to and through Dungeons and Dragons is happening a little later. Those people appear in the general. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, you'll find them in the general. Gygax, I believe, was even one of their, they have these kind of like reporters for different regions of the country that talk about. I think he was one for his region for a while. So yes, it's definitely later. I was not a role RPG player myself. I'm strictly war games, and then when we went to the conventions, they were like those guys were often, they were playing on the other end of the convention floor. So I don't know from personal experience. I have not seen a lot about them, but there's no reason why there couldn't be one. The problem that I see, as I mentioned, diplomacies, I think of as being slightly in a different category because of the
it is.
issue. The issue with most RPGs that I've played, I had kids, so I did end up playing them in various ways, is the way how you would deal with the placement of the units would be tricky in the pre-tabletop simulator, send you a photo, all those kinds of things. How would you gather that information? I'll say, based on my experience, there were systems. I don't know them. I haven't seen them, but I can guarantee that there were players who tried to figure it out. It's just a common line through the research I've done on any kind of game is the game is, it's like an architect builds a building and then people go in and they do what they're going to do with the building, right? The architect loses control the minute that building is opened up. It's the same with games. Players take that game as their own and they start doing things with it. And I'm sure with role-playing games, something like that, like what I described, probably happened. It's just, it would have been different and it would have been later.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting.
All right. So here it looks like we've got an exhibit.
Oh, I know this game. Yes.
You do?
Yes,
have you seen
I know this. So I've never seen a physical copy of it. I've only seen pictures, and I was really interested in it. That's the game about the German-Finnish war in, is it 1918, 1919? Something like this?
Yes. Correct on the general stuff. It's kind of interesting that it's a German-Finnish. It's Finnish Civil War.
Yeah, the Finnish Civil War, but you have German invasion in the end.
There were Germans and Swedes involved, It is that, and this is the Finnish Game Museum. There's the curator, Nicholas Nyland, is there in the middle in that one photograph showing me the game. What fascinated me about this game, first of all, it was exhibited in this is a big museum complex in Tampere in Finland. And it's a former factory building, and they have about 6 or 7 different museums in there. This is the Finnish Game Museum, but downstairs is a Finnish History Museum as well. That when I visited there, this would have been spring of 23. When I visited there, they were having an exhibit on the Finnish Civil War. So I saw this game was being exhibited in 2 places, in 2 different museums at the same time. And they also, as you can see there, they've also created a facsimile. It's totally fascinating because when I first saw this game, unlike other games I've seen from that period, I thought, oh, that looks kind of modern in a way. Point-to-point movement, they had this system for dealing with unit losses and things like that. And no, it was contemporary. It was done at the time of the Civil War, which then raises the other interesting question of why is somebody during a civil war over 100 years ago even making a game about that war? Not that it's strange to do it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I want to know why they did it, who they were making it for, how it was consumed, and all of that. Reminds me a little bit of that game that there's, I think, one copy of in the world, Suffragetto, that game about the suffragette movement.
Yeah.
It's contemporary, right? Okay, who were they making it for? What was the purpose of, what were they trying to communicate through that game? It raises a whole bunch of questions. They have gathered some documentation. You can kind of see in the one image in the lower left, there's some interviews that they've related to the game and some of the documentation they've put there. But I was absolutely fascinated by it, and Nicholas was nice enough to kind of walk me through how the game is played.
So I was wondering, have you played it? Because for me, that was the big question. So I've seen images of it because at some point I was really interested in that, like the Finnish Civil War. And I discovered that this game existed. And I was also surprised that at the time someone made a game seriously engaging with the history of the conflict. But I couldn't find anything around, okay, how does it play? What kind of ideas are there? Because when I look at it from outside, as you say, it looks very contemporary. Like it looks like kind of games that we could see today. And I was wondering, does it play the same, or is it just an illusion that it looks like a game we could play today, but it's actually quite different?
No, it plays like a game. It has a very 2024 feel to it when you play it. So Nicholas has that kit there. I bet, and we can do this later. I can give you contact information. He might.
I would love to.
Yes, please.
To reproduce the kit. Just ping me later and remind me. As you can see, there's a sheet of paper in the middle. As I recall it, there are some rules to it. There's something about you sort of orient the counters to keep track of losses and things like that. I found it. I did not play the game entirely. I did sort of just a walkthrough with him of 1 or 2 turns, and I just thought it was amazing. I would say if there's people out there, maybe one of you, perhaps, this is a game that I think someone should look at as a foundation, maybe for a reworking of it in some way that respects, its historical authenticity. It just seems like it'd be a good project.
I think that's a really good point, and I really like this idea of doing game restoration in a way, like taking old designs, maybe that are even earlier than the Avalon Hill era, or even even at that era, and saying, okay, could I keep the same ethos of the game, the same ideas, and keep some of the things that were actually quite unusual and disappeared afterwards, but were interesting mechanics, and just refresh it and make it a newer design. I think there is always some really cool ideas to do. But yeah, I would love to play this, see if there is something to it, because I think that would be so interesting. And
this is the start of the Wargame Archaeology planned field trip to Finland. So
yeah, exactly. But just even having the kit, being able to do a kit at home and playing around with it to see what it plays like. And there are some games like this that are actually quite unusual. I don't know if you know the designer from Risk was a French designer, and he actually designed, I think before Risk, a game called Rome and Carthage. And it is actually a point-to-point map. You play with cards, you move units on the board, and you're like, wait a minute, I've never heard about this game. This is the guy who made Risk, and it's super interesting. And it looks like some games actually kind of disappeared, and we forgot that there were really innovative ideas even before war games became a thing. And maybe there is something to look back and rediscover those games.
From an academic perspective, and I say that it doesn't have to be that academics would do this. It could be an event by anyone. The thing that jumps out at me is somebody needs to do a conference or a collection of essays on war games before World War II.
Yeah.
Since we kind of, with diplomacy and Charles Roberts and stuff, we tend to think, and I fall into this trap myself. The first commercial first commercial war game.
The world started with tactics.
Everything, in the 50s, post World War II, and to just say, okay, looking at games before. There were, of course, many of these chase games and things like that had historical themes, but then you come across something like this and you think, oh my God, there are a lot of ideas here that don't fit into what we think of as the like the 19th, early 20th century kind of game. I don't know of a lot of work that's been done on that, and it would be great to dig deeper.
Yeah, I don't know of a lot of it, and now I keep thinking about other games. Like I think about Stratego, for example, which originally was L'Attaque, once again a French game that was released early 20th century. Also had a massive impact on war games. Like it's basically the precursor of block games. Like you move units and you don't know what they are until you're in contact with them. And I think this is actually quite interesting, and we kind of forget those things. And you were talking about the fact that this was made around the era of the Finnish Civil War. And I think if I remember correctly, I think that during the French Revolution, you had a lot of newspapers that were printed around. And actually you had some of those newspapers that included games in it that talked about the politics of the time, where you could actually cut off the cards and you could have a sort of card game that you could have at home and stuff like this. And it feels like we have the sense that what we do is quite modern, playing history through mass-produced games, but actually maybe it's not that modern. Yeah. it existed in some forms before, and we just kind of forgot about it. But sorry for the
no,
we need to, it's a call for a more extensive history of board games. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. No, this is giving me so many ideas already. All right, what do we got here?
Okay, so another find was a thing called this publication when SPI was starting. Dunnigan, bought Strategy and Tactics, started SPI, brought together this core of people that sort of took where Avalon Hill kind of stalled and developed different kinds of games, but also this group, Rodger McGowan and Dunnigan and people like that, they developed a lot of terminology that we use today, such as the idea of the game developer, which has a little different meaning with board games than it does with other kinds of games. And they had this publication called Game Design. It's pretty rare. It's part of Dunnigan's interesting mix of projects when he was starting all of this. He was designing games, but he also had these. So the first project I know of where he was inviting players to choose from little descriptions of game designs that they had in mind. I think that's what might be what the page on the lower left is relating to, where they had just a whole bunch of like short descriptions. Let's do a game about this, or a game about that, or a game, another sort of game. And then they also had kind of like playtesting versions of games that they sent out to a lot of people. That's in fact, they would number them like number 18, number 19, and so forth. And one of those is what became Panzer Blitz, which was, for me, the big moment around 1970 for game design. This idea that you could go from these monographic games that were just about one topic and bespoke design to deal with, the African campaign or Stalingrad or D-Day or something like that, a battle or campaign, to a system, scenario-based system where you had components that could be reused for a number of different games. That would later have a huge influence as it developed through other games, a huge influence on the development of computer games as well. And so he was experimenting in all kinds of things and publishing all kinds of things to build out a much larger community than Avalon Hill had around not just playing games, but designing games. The basic problem for SPI was Dunnigan, who had a kind of a love-hate relationship with Avalon Hill by this time, was thinking there's got to be a way to do more than one game a year. So he made this commitment to putting a game in every issue of the magazine. And now you're talking about doing 10, 12, however many games. Whoops, my earbud just fell out. However many games you need to do the magazine and other games that you want to do. So he started developing all these techniques for getting input from people, developing a bunch of games simultaneously. And then, of course, with the Panzerblitz also offered the opportunity for one system to just develop a whole bunch of other different games as well. So there's just a lot of things going on. And this is just something where, again, I got lucky. I was able to get a copy of this for the Stanford Libraries and add it to the collection.
That's really cool. Also, is this to a Mrs. Sneed?
It sure is.
Hell yeah.
Oh, and thank you. So I meant to caveat this at the beginning. I'll do it now. I was talking about communities, right? And subtext of what I was saying is, gosh, look at all these things that people did to include more people in this community. And sort of like a theme is, wow, how inclusive the wargame community was in the 1960s. That's totally wrong.
Yeah. I would say from what we've read, I would say it's totally wrong.
Yeah. And like Aaron Trammell's book, Privilege of Play, is something, or Carla Kosurik's book, Coin-Operated Americans, which is about how arcades became a space for male adolescents when it didn't really start out that way. There was a lot of exclusion as well as inclusion. Not everybody was included. And yeah, when you see women being involved in this, it instantly you have questions you want to know. Was she playing these games, or was maybe it was her 12-year-old son who was interested or something, and just someone doing this it could have been different things to explain that, but you're immediately interested in it and want to know more about this, because we know it was not a very inclusive community in the way we would think about that today. There's a lot that needs to be written about that, and I had meant to caveat that at the beginning, and now I'm doing it.
In my fantasy version of this, Mrs. Sneed loves to play war games. So
I know people ask me this all the time. In the earlier period, today, lots of people, yourself included, design games, lots of women. And I only know of, say, pre-1990, I only know of one board war game in this tradition. It was a game about the Civil War, about the Battle of Gettysburg, by a designer named Helena Rubinstein, of all names, who did it as a master's thesis for, I don't remember which college where she was, but there wasn't a lot. Role-playing games, and I think Aaron in his book goes into this, he goes into it in much more detail. There was more going on. I'll say here, I edited a book series for MIT Press called Game Histories, and we're working with an author on a manuscript about women in the early development of role-playing games. There was a community. That story has not been told, but there was a community. I can't point to one for war games, really. I hope somebody will come along and correct that.
Interesting. All right. Putting a stamp on games. What is this? Is this what we can access ourselves?
Yeah. So the original article that I wrote about play by mail was, I have to look here, I'm trying to remember the Journey Planet, was that the name of it? Yeah, Journey Planet. It's kind of an online zine that was published. They had a special issue about postal mail and games in general and things like that. And so I gathered this thing together. Like many things on the internet, this online journal is very difficult to find nowadays. So we have a facility through the Stanford Libraries where I can self-deposit items into our digital repository. And I took the penultimate version. I didn't take the published version. I took the last draft of it, so there wouldn't be a definite copyright problem. And I created a collection. It's online. Anybody, I'm sorry, I took this photo in a way you can't see a URL, but if you just go to that SearchWorks, you see that, searchworks.stanford.edu, that's our catalog. If you type in Putting a Stamp on Games, you will get this collection, which includes my article. It's in there somewhere. Yes, near the bottom, it says Journey Planet. And then documents, some of the photos that you've seen, but also scans of some of the publications around PBM, some correspondence, the combat resolution forums. That's all in there. So if you want to do a quick, not comprehensive, but just get an orientation with including primary sources, it's all there, and anybody in the world can go there and download it and use this stuff. That's also, if somebody who's listening, or one of the podcast hosts perhaps, had a collection of digital materials related to board games, and there aren't any major copyright issues that would cause a problem, we could do this. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be my collection, but you could do it through me, and I would be happy to create a collection around a smaller collection of stuff like this one.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I know what I'm doing later tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my job. Is I have conversations with people, and they walk away with 100 hours of stuff to look through, and then I go back to having my coffee. Oh, this is the thing I told you about. Yeah. This is the Stalingrad game, and you see, this photo I took mainly to show the game, but you can see some of the correspondence that's in the box there. You can see this is not a mint in shrink wrap copy of the game. The counters are punched, all that. So you can see some stains here and there. I think even on the map, there's a couple of coffee stains, that sort of thing.
It just means it's been loved.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It gives a patina. Yeah, that's
yeah. It's been used.
This is an artifact, not a. Yeah, this is cool.
Yes. Have you played in your project? Have you played Stalingrad yet?
No, we
not
haven't
yet.
played Stalingrad. Not yet.
Yeah.
Looks like we better.
What was the time of the release for Stalingrad?
I'm pretty sure it was out or just about released around the time the PBM form started, so it would have been mid-60s.
Yeah, let me check, because that could be one of the.
If we zoomed, it's probably in the lower right corner there, I'm guessing. Well, you can see, and by the way, you see the hexes are not identified. There's that.
Yeah, they're not numbered, so this is pre-numbered hexes.
Oh yeah, it's 1963, so it was just before it began. So it was released right when, just the year before when the general started, or around that time. So
yeah, so there were 7 games, I want to say, that were accounted for in this PBM kit that came out in 64, 65, and I think Stalingrad was one of them. So yeah.
Nice.
Super
also, Roberts had this notion in the marketing. It's also part of the story about building this community, that these were adult games, which everybody snickers when they hear that he used that term that way, because it has a different connotation today. But his idea was, he had worked a little bit in communications, and so he had this kind of flowery language he sometimes had in some of the advertising. But you see in this always, there's usually, like you see on the side of the box, for adults 12 years and up. Well, okay, I don't know. That's a broad definition of adults.
Yeah.
But hey, that 12-year-old was like, damn right, I'm an adult.
Well, yeah.
It's a good marketing tactic, I would say that. Yeah.
It's the important thing was to get that adults in there. There's a different kind of game. That's the little veneer that they wanted to have on all of their games. Was it is different category for adults, even if you're 13.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so now we're opening it up to see what's in this box. Some examples of it. I've spread out a few things. None of this is from. These are all, even though the sheets might look the same, these are all from this box, right? So there's the correspondence. There's an example, like I mentioned earlier before, that there's some military officers. You'll see there's a Captain, Whitaker. And the MIT SGS is that MIT Strategic Simulation Game Society. I think that must have been the full name. Typed letters, handwritten things, the newspapers. Now you know why there's newspapers there, right? And you can see those are stock tables right there. An interesting thing about that, a little side, this is like getting into the minutiae of this culture. So people got paper newspapers back then. You remember, you've seen those when you were young?
Yeah, actually, my dad worked for a newspaper, and so did my mom before she wrote for other companies. But one of my childhood memories is walking over the basement where they were printing newspaper and smelling newsprint.
Oh, lucky you! Wow.
Yeah.
So you had the subscription, but the thing was, usually you'd read them and toss them out, recycle them today. Read them, toss them out. You didn't keep a stack of newspapers at home. So you get the move. It might have been after the guy mailed it to, the other player mailed it to you, but oops, that was yesterday's newspaper. I don't have it anymore. So a little thing about this culture is many walks or drives to the library were involved in this. People going to the library and getting the count, or maybe making a photocopy, or whatever you did to get that information from the newspaper that you no longer had with those stock numbers, but was still over at the library. And that's, oftentimes too, people would clip out. The reason for this is they would often say like, okay, here's the numbers I got. And to prove that you weren't just making up the numbers, if you did have the newspaper, you would cut it out and send it back with the move so they could see how you did the math.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's those are on the left. You see them in the Avalon Hill forms. I think that's what that is. You would actually see the counter depicted, and then just right below it, the location. So there was, visually, it was really easy to work with, and that's not something people would have been able to do on their own. And it again shows it's one of these examples. This happens in the history of technology. There's a lot of examples of this with technologies, of this feedback loop between companies, producers, and the consumers. Some things are produced by the company, in this case Avalon Hill, because they learn more about how people are using this kind of game, or what they want from it, or what's going to work or not going to work. And they make it easier. They create these affordances then in something like this form, so that players can more easily play by mail. Other things were developed entirely by players, like the sheet I showed you earlier from AHIX. That was entirely a player developed things, and those things are in constant conversation with each other.
Wow. Oh, what do we got here?
Oh, speaking of which, that's AHIX.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is this it?
Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah, and you see, I think, let's see, there's a listing. There's a listing of players there, just to give you an idea. I was hoping to find some people there that were prominent. Maybe somebody else will recognize the name there. But this is, you would get these. Membership. Oh, this is actually the Avalon Hill Play-by-Mail organizations. Yet another variant, I guess. There's a lot of email that went back and forth about these things. Usually for something like AHIX or another thing, you would sign up, and then you get like a welcome packet, something like that. And you would, they tell you what you do, what you get in your membership, how you use the play-by-mail system. Here's some other players. You're not alone. All of that was part of it. And through this, you're feeling like you're part of the community. I can see what I think is the Stalingrad. Yeah, it might be Russian. I can't quite tell enough about the map from that little sliver, but it
does look like the Stalingrad map on the
back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this is even something that came from the MIT group.
Nice. All right, and then Fred is running out of time because it's late for him. So let's do like a quick tour. So we saw this one.
Yeah.
Saw that one. Yeah, that's AHIX.
Yeah.
That's AHIX for sure. And that's Russian Campaign, which of course is later.
Amazing.
Great game, by the way.
And this is a close up.
Yeah, and this is like the assemblage of different things. This is all AHIX. I'm been assigned a game. I'm 1101. That's my number. I'm playing Russian Campaign with another player. That's kind of covered by the stock market stuff. That was Brian, I guess. If I see on Axis these allies, you can kind of see numbers have been crossed out because we use them on the combat resolution key, which is known as an ERK. That's how that was pronounced. I wrote it down because I couldn't remember what that stands for. It's Individual Combat Resolution Key. That's what ICRK stands for.
Very
so there's
fancy.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. There's a kind of language, language in a way when you start having things like that, it starts, it's like watching Star Trek and they're describing something that this machine, some technology on the spaceship, and it's like, oh yeah, that must be a really cool technology. So you have like a really complex name, and people assume that there's a lot behind it. Yeah, and there's stuff here. The guy's writing to me as we begin the game, and you see you commonly introduced yourself. You did talk about yourself, say how much you played, and then finally, of course, once again, there's the stock market sheet. It's hard. I think maybe by this point people have gotten the idea, but I just have to keep emphasizing this weird connection with the newspaper and the development of these systems.
Yeah. So Byron, one of our viewers, asked if there were ever problems with the stock quote being different the same day because of print time, or did you have to agree to use the exact same newspaper?
You had to agree to use the closing number. So if your newspaper did something weird, then you had to make sure that it was that number. And that's one reason why you sometimes sent the newspaper with the move back. And that's one of my son's cats. I just thought, hey, we're on the internet. We have to have one of those.
Yes, always cats.
That's that game about
of all.
Yes, it's amazing. I have several. This is that game about it's called 2040 or something like that, about sort of civil war in the U.S.
Yeah.
We were playing that, and he just wanted to be part of it.
He's got to be part of everything. It's good. I like it. All right. So we've been going for almost a full 90 minutes. So we're gonna do the wind up. Henry, thank you so much. This was amazing. I absolutely loved this.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm gonna go. Part of my penance is I'm gonna go back after this and look for some of your episodes.
We have a geek list. We'll send it to you.
It's
a board game geek like thread where we just update with our different.
Oh, I appreciate it because this is I'm interested, fascinated, connected to all of this, and I really want to see what you guys did with these early games.
Yeah, and I'm actually really curious about keeping this discussion going with you, maybe offline, maybe for you to inform some of the things that we could do in the series. I think it's really awesome. I'm really thankful that you could make the time and show us all of this. That's really cool.
Oh yeah, totally my pleasure. And if there's something useful I can contribute, just let me know. I'm happy to do it.
Great.
Amazing. All right, those of you out there, if you have old play-by-mail records that you would like to
send them over to Henry.
Posterity.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to be up to my neck in them.
I was talking to a friend who was playing the 80s in France, and they actually had their own systems. If you have any interest in this, I can check with them to see if they, by any chance, have some archives to see how different it was between maybe the what was happening in the French community. Was it aligned with what was happening? I will ask and I will let you know.
Thank you. Yes, we're very interested in that. Very interested in sometimes we talk like everything was happening in the U.S. or Britain maybe, but that's not the case. We want to know about what was happening everywhere.
Cool. That's great. That was awesome. Another awesome episode.
Fantastic. All right, we'll be back soon with some more Wargame Archaeology now that Fred and I have both moved and successfully settled.
Yes.
And Henry, thanks again so much. I can't wait for whatever we're going to do next because I know there's got to be something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Happy gaming, everyone.